Okay, so I'm starting now.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Sharat, Chandra, and I'm the host for today's webinar. We'll wait for some time for others to join in, and they'll start. So in the meantime, let's get a hang of what's happening in enterprise blockchain space as we speak. So as we move into this new decade, blockchain has moved beyond its hype curve, and a kind of pragmatic realism has set in. So companies and enterprises, they both have realized that the technology presents certain set of limitations, and they need to rethink their approach when it comes to adopting emerging technologies like blockchain. To discuss more on this, today I'm joined by Mark Caraway. Mark leads the partnerships at BlockApps. Welcome, Mark, to the webinar, and please tell us more about your blockchain journey and BlockApps journey as well. Mark,
Thanks,
over to you.
Yeah, nice to be here. Joined BlockApps about a year and a half ago to oversee our partnerships. It's a very exciting role when you think about the power of blockchain is really in the ecosystem and in the larger network. And so as we grow our network and ecosystem, I have the pleasure of working with our partners, across all verticals as well as various functions. So we take great pride in our application partners as well as our consulting partners, cloud partnerships, and others. So very happy to be here and discuss where blockchain enterprise adoption is today.
Interesting. Mark, I mean, if we can go back to what Gartner predicted maybe 3 years ago, they said that more than 3.1 trillion in terms of new business value will be created through blockchain. But in reality, there's a huge difference in terms of expectations and reality, right? So what do you think, what has gone wrong, or what could have possibly gone wrong, and why we're not able to see the kind of adoption which should happen in the enterprise blockchain space?
Yeah, I think kind of boils down to maybe three key factors that have been limiting at this point. Certainly, as a new technology, there's just a knowledge learning curve. So not everybody who is involved in blockchain has the same level of knowledge, and especially the end users who will be receiving the value may not have the most knowledge where the ones building the solutions may have. I think the second thing is alignment. In the past, databases were bought individually, and you kind of made your own decisions. With a blockchain network, you kind of have to make group decisions before launch, and I think companies are underestimating that. Even within an internal organization, the fact that all the parties within the company have to agree ahead of time and really have to have the capabilities in place. And certainly as you look to a larger network and a larger system with multiple organizations, that obviously becomes amplified. I would say the third thing is, a lot of times we're seeing the technology driving the solution, but really it should be in reverse. I think the value should be defined first, the goal first, and then the technology should drive towards that goal. And so I think we're seeing kind of a reverse pattern where companies are jumping in, trying to learn the technology, but not trying to figure out where they're headed and what the real value of what they're trying to build is first. And so I think that will be a theme for today's conversation, and certainly something we've at BlockApps tried to address ahead of time.
Great. I think companies are also prioritizing maybe technical design first vis-a-vis the economic design, right? So that if you don't have the right economic design in place for the first time, and if you start building technology around it, you're bound to fail, or you're bound to lag behind when it comes to expectations as far as the cost factor is concerned, right?
Exactly.
So Mark, right. So how do you propose, how should companies adopt, or maybe is there a method which they can follow, like identifying a right use case, what do you think, how it should be taken forward?
Yeah, we actually have a framework around kind of the ROI model as well
Mhm.
as the business framework. And so when you think about a traditional database, right, there's typically, one main user, one main buyer, and, the values for that entity or individual. In a blockchain network, there's typically, multiple entities. And again, those can be separate as we've listed here, or it could be, separate entities within an organization. And one of the challenges we've found is when we put, entities into this type of framework, that the value section, who's actually receiving the value, may not match up with the funding, who's actually signing off or has the budget, or who's actually paying for this network. And then that thirdly may not line up with who's actually using the system. And so, if those three things are not really, aligned as best they can, you may create something that has value, but it will not continue through to, deeper stages of funding to get to production. And then if it does get to production, but the ones who are using it are not the ones receiving value, then it will kind of stagnate in production. And so we look for a framework like this, where you can see the same entity has receiving the value, is the one that is, procuring or funding the network, and they're ultimately the ones using the network at the end of the solution. And so this is a framework that can be used for, consortiums as well as individual organizations.
Yeah, so it's important to establish value for end user as well, rather than creating a solution which may not find takers, right?
Right. Again, the challenge of a network is there's so many parties involved that, you've got your action and reaction, and you want to make sure that as the network provides value through the entire system, there's enough value for those that will be using it as well.
Mhm. So what do you think, is there a way to frame the MVP framework for success so that it can be moved into production when ready?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we focus on are, trying to solve those challenges ahead of time that we try to discuss. And so I think there's kind of four buckets that we focus on when we look at, an MVP framework for success. Um, Certainly, we define success as, moving to production, but there's kind of four buckets here. I think the first one is the validation. And to your point, you've got to validate the use case and the economic model first, but then you do have to validate the tech solution. Is it the right solution for that use case? And, do you have the next step is the capabilities. And so under capabilities, that's not only just the capabilities of the technology, are the features ready and available in blockchain solutions today for what you're requiring? Or is this building something completely new for the first time? And if so, you just need to be prepared for that. But I think the other challenge we see with some of our larger projects is, even after building the solution, if the capabilities aren't there to support a blockchain around, end user management and just production grade support, that can also be a hindrance. So we try to make sure we understand the capabilities of the group and the technology. The third, we talked about it, is alignment. And, there's a lot of ways to think about alignment, but certainly everyone has to agree that there's value uniquely for each entity. The parties have to agree on what the scope is. That's probably one of the biggest challenges we're seeing today is, every party within the system may have a different metric for where they want to hit for the scope. And they really have to find the smallest common denominator. So when we think about alignment, we always say to start small. What is the one thing that everyone agrees upon? And, is there enough value in that agreed upon area to focus on? And that leads really to number four is defining that target. Does that end target match the value for the original use case? And do we have a roadmap for success? I think the other challenge is, we've seen and we've created great technology solutions that have proven the value, but there hasn't been a roadmap to how do we onboard 10 unique entities into this system? How do we onboard hundreds of users of the same type? How do we look at the next level of funding or commercialization support around the system that may be external, could be regulations or just additional infrastructure support. And so we try to at least address as many of these on the front end and use this as our guiding framework for success.
Great. So could you share an example or maybe a use case where you have used this framework for one of your clients or?
Yeah, certainly. I think one of our larger projects is with Bayer Crop Science in the agriculture space. I think we spent a lot of time early on with them, just validating the use case. Is there enough value in the fact that we can track your product further down the supply chain? Does that create new value or additional value? We early on, validated that, and we spent quite a bit of time with their team just walking through our technology and the platform. And I think that was key for success here because they wanted to make sure that, this wasn't just, marketing or hype. It wasn't just a few screens that we're showing, that they could really see the tech on the back end and understand how it works. And then we, on the flip side, we spend a lot of time educating them on how blockchain, works in a real life setting, so that they were comfortable having the capabilities both from the business user side, but also their own IT infrastructure to kind of support this as a large scale worldwide product. I think the other thing that we did spend a lot of time on with Bayer is just getting everyone into the room early and often, and not making any decisions unless everyone was involved and agreed on the decision. So certainly with Bayer Crop Science, this has been beneficial. We've got 20, 30 different unique companies involved, and hundreds of users, and creating value kind of down the chain at a large scale, worldwide, right? So this is, we're looking at multiple assets and multiple geographies at this point.
Sure. So is there any maybe an ROI figure which can be shared, or how did you make other participants see the business value of using this?
Yeah, ideally, the participants themselves can clearly see that. I think it can be a yellow flag if the blockchain company BlockApps is trying to create the value, because hopefully they see it quite clearly. And I think the nice thing with Bayer, at a large scale, right? When you're working at large numbers, even an incremental change can mean millions or potentially, billions towards the bottom line. When you have better visibility into your supply chain, and you can, time products a bit better, especially in their case, when you have, only 1 or 2 growing seasons per year. An incremental change for one growing season, could make a large difference.
Yeah, it can. Yeah. So I could see more people are joining in. So I would encourage attendees to type in their questions in the chat window, and we'll take that up. My next question, Mark, would be what's your take on the governance model and how important governance models are for adoption when it comes to blockchain?
Yeah, I think a little bit we mentioned this. Governance may be the most least talked about, or something that should be the most talked about. So I would say when you think about the changing of dynamics from traditional database architecture to blockchain, I think governance is one of those things that is extremely important. And so I think, again, there's 2 pieces of it, right? It's you've got to start with the business and understand really who owns the network. And it doesn't, in the sense of ownership, it's who's making the decision to drive the network forward. Who decides who can join the network? How do you decide that? Who's in the room making the decisions around scope, scale, how data is shared, how security should be approached? These are all things that should be understood from the business perspective. And then driving towards that, the technology should match and be able to have the capabilities to match any type of governance model. And so, with BlockApps STRATO, we have, rules for governance defined in a governance contract. So we kind of map the business rules in the governance contract, and we have, roles-based access control to kind of match that in the system. So ultimately, with the blockchain, as you know, the nodes really, decide. And so the nodes need to be taught by the users and builders of the network, and they need to have the capability for a flexible governance structure.
Mm-hmm. So is there any governance standard which you guys follow, or is there any way it can be linked to the interoperability part where two people are following different governance models or frameworks? So how do you guys speak to each other? How these two platforms will speak to each other in terms of interoperability?
Yeah, when you think about interoperability, I think again it's the lowest common denominator. What needs to be shared, and I think that's where you kind of you take a large data asset and you kind of circle which fields or which pieces of the asset do we need to share and what do we view as competitive. So I think it's when you've got two entities or multiple and they're trying to create that interoperability, it's really drawing the line of what do we see as non-competitive and what do we see as competitive. And then from the interoperability standpoint, as long as the application itself can kind of integrate and communicate with multiple systems on each side, I think that gives a lot of flexibility. But when we think about governance, there's a few ways to look at it. There's typically you can create a consortium and kind of give that body the influence to drive decisions amongst all parties. You can have kind of a pure democratic way where everyone gets an equal vote. Or you kind of find a company that maybe is already orchestrating the technology in a way that has a network governance features already. So we've had success partnering with companies who have kind of already created a governance strategy and standards for the industry, and we're just adding blockchain onto existing standards and existing governance models.
Okay, so now talking about standards, BlockApps is part of Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. So could you please share more how BlockApps is contributing to the alliance and what are they doing when it comes to standardization with respect to governance or interoperability?
Yeah, I think the nice thing about the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and why we're a founding member is I think standardization will drive adoption, and so really the EEA is focusing on standardizing the technology so that companies can work with many different vendors as they need, but they all kind of communicate in a singular fashion. And so we're very heavily involved in driving the technical standards around just the communication of blockchain and also the interoperability framework within the EEA. And then also on the business side, we're heavily focused on just educating enterprises on Ethereum around the mainnet, but also taking feedback from the enterprises and from the value models that we're looking at and putting that back into the technology. If you look at any kind of major technological revolution, the tech learned from the market need, right? So we've found and discovered many market needs for blockchain. And so what we are doing at the EEA is trying to wrap around a technology that can help more efficiently meet those needs. So I think it's a good partnership between the enterprise community as well as the Ethereum development community.
Yeah. So Mark, when we talk about undertaking any implementation, cost is one important factor which companies consider. So how do companies deal with higher costs of implementation, be it Capex or OpEx? How they should go about it?
That's a great question, and I think certainly it's key going forward. One thing that we focus on is just again, making sure that the value is, clearly defined. And so certainly on the CapEx side, if there's no long-term value, then it's going to be very tough to spend anything, within, the CapEx community. So we really try to make sure that that value is clearly defined to all parties up front, right? Anyone who will be funding from with the CapEx lens must see that value. I think the other thing, as you see, on the first here is you want to have a product that is, has already infrastructure features built in. And so that's why we spent a lot of our time making it easy for enterprises to just build that last mile, right? What does the use case mean? What is the logic? And you don't have to worry about building blockchain tools and privacy features and governance modules. All these things are kind of out of the box, and so I think you can save a lot of your costs around development by buying a product that, in our case, has already spent 5 years in development. So you're basically getting 5 years of work and feature development out of the box. And so I think that's, one key. The other thing is certainly, start small, right? As we learn about blockchain, there's no reason to try to burst the budget, unless you're very confident in your approach. And so even a small win is a good win, because ideally, if you've got the right framework around your MVP, you spent the time, putting pieces in place that you can continue to build upon. And so a small win is certainly, big. And then when you think about OpEx, the other nice thing about blockchain is instead of, 10 organizations buying the same database 10 times, they're all sharing the cost of, one shared ledger. So the nice thing with, the OpEx side is ideally, when you go back to the ROI model around the users, whoever's using the product in the long run should be sharing the OpEx cost. And so I think that, the OpEx should diminish over time as the network grows. And we've seen that in a few of our consortium products, that, the more players you add to the network, the more value you get out of the network and the lower the cost for each individual.
Great. So OpEx will go down as network matures, right?
Yeah, exactly. Certainly the more value you can put into the system, the better, but just a larger, group of shared individuals can help as well.
So do you think it's feasible, or it's the right way to use blockchain as a service kind of model when if you want to start small and then scale?
We do, yeah. We think blockchain as a service is the right model because you really need that flexibility and the additional kind of oversight that comes with the service model. And so that's kind of what we offer, is making sure that we kind of understand the changing dynamics of the network. And so it really is a fluid model that matches with growth, but also we found instances where we know there's higher volume or higher demand in certain time periods. And so you really want to have that flexible model to kind of match what the value you're trying to drive.
Mark, I have a question from Billy, and he wants you to explain the OpEx cost rate and how it goes down once the network grows.
Yeah, so if you start the network with 2 organizations within a company, let's say you're improving invoice management, so you start with accounting and maybe one business unit. You may add another business unit to that network going forward, finding that the accounting works well, you've saved on the invoicing process, and now you can attach that to every product line within an organization. And so you're basically just sharing the OpEx across multiple products within the organization. On the flip side, if you've got 3 entities within an industry that are using the network, they've proven the value, they're creating value within that, you can add more entities within the network. And so you think about vendors other ecosystem players, just other industry participants. And that's where you start seeing the transaction-based pricing that, a flexible blockchain as a service model, has a standard component, but then it also has transaction-based components. So those who are using it the most should, be spending the most, but that is going to spread across all parties. And so you've got a network with, many different users sharing the same type of data. They can all share the cost of that data.
Yeah. I have another question from Gaurav. He wants to know that it's very difficult to get stakeholders on board and get to see them the business value. So he wants to know, is there any business model which can be beneficial and which can bring all stakeholders on the blockchain network? You can explain with example, maybe a use case.
Yeah, this is a great question because I think it's a very tough challenge. It goes back to kind of the chicken or the egg. Nobody wants to join a product that's not offering them value, but you've got to create the value, to be able to give that to a new company. And so what we try to do, again, it goes back a little bit to the lowest common denominator. How do we, find some value that all stakeholders, can agree upon? But the other thing that we've done is, if you go back to, let me go back to the ROI framework slide. Um, the value may not be the same for each organization, right? And so when you think about a supply chain, there's, on the beginning of the supply chain, those folks want to see further down into the supply chain, closer to the consumer and the buyer. And so the value for, a distributor may be different because they just want to understand demand a bit better, where the value for the buyer may want to see more transparency around the product, right? And so the value model doesn't have to be the same for all participants, but there does have to be some value because, to your point, if the buyer doesn't see any value in transparency around its products, then they're not going to join the system. And so what we found is, trying to identify each entity and stakeholder separately first, and then bringing that together to see if they all agree that the value that they're each receiving from this can be found through the same kind of data model and business logic. So I hope that answers your question. Or Scott, I don't know if you have any other questions on that piece.
Yeah, it does. We have another question from Sai Prasad. He wants to know that how the integration between legacy systems and emerging technologies like blockchain can happen seamlessly. And this is one of the biggest roadblocks when it comes to adoption. Companies, they do rethink twice about this part, the integration part with their core systems.
Yeah, I would say again, this is a major roadblock and potentially can be, one of the most time-consuming parts of the overall development and implementation. I think there's, a few things you can do, right? Is you can ideally time the blockchain implementation when they're already making some sort of larger tech upgrade or update. And so companies usually look at their large infrastructure, 5, 10, 15 years at a time, every 5 to 15 years. And so potentially timing that with their, their update or their transformation will be helpful. I think the other thing that we've tried to do, again, from the product side, is having the fully RESTful APIs, makes it easy on our end. So you want to make sure the blockchain at least, is simple to integrate with. And so you can potentially build some tooling around the legacy platform. And so we've done that for a number of our large clients is sometimes just we actually, tweak their own legacy platforms for them so that they don't have to, spend the time and effort around that. But I would say, again, the small steps that they can take to do that, just finding what is one system that, may be the best suited for this. And so identifying the right system can also be, is there one system that maybe can add the most value So you're not integrating with many different platforms within a company, but you can start with one. The other thing is, again, having kind of a flexible configuration model. And so this is why we made the choice of kind of being able to provide OAuth configuration with really any OAuth provider. So I think, again, we're coming to the table with choices so that ideally, if they have a legacy, Oracle or SAP database, that we've already got a pre-built API for those systems. So I think a lot of that is, on the blockchain side to help with those translations. And so we've got some, API configuration tools as well as translation tools as well.
And I believe these tools are out of the box tools, right?
Yeah, exactly. So again, we're trying to limit the amount of development that has to be done here on the blockchain side. So I think that's how we can help out, is to say, hey, you don't need us to build anything additionally on the blockchain, but we will help you enhance your own platform.
Yeah, I think it's a great enabling solution for people who don't want to spend more time and money on making integration happen. I have one question about data security. With the current regulation around GDPR, and even in India, we have another law coming up. So what do you think, how network security or data security is being handled by, let's say, blockchain service providers or blockchain managed service providers?
Yeah, security is certainly, very important when you think about government and, regulated environments, as well as, just highly, high value assets. So I think the main thing, blockchains in a private and permission environment provide is, privacy and private keys. Right? And so when we provide a node network for a large ecosystem, the data is not shared on the node. The data is shared through private chains. And in our platform, you cannot access the private chain unless the node you are on has access and the account also has access to that private chain. And so what you'll find is we could take a large database or databases or data sets and we can segmentize it, right? Because you don't need to see all of the data. Each party and the system only needs access to certain data. So that's one way that we can kind of eliminate some of that fear around data security. Is just, putting it in buckets. And so if you want the entire, data set, you would have to have a malfunction or, fraud or hacking to every node and user. So even on the same node, you'll have multiple users who have different access to different private keys. And so when we think about security, it's not just, tampering, but it's also just, issues, right? If the system goes down, the nice thing on a blockchain node is, as long as one other party's node on the system is still up and running, if your node goes down or, there's some malfunction on your end, the other party still holds the data through the private chain. So you can spin your node back up and receive the data that you may have lost. So security, not just for any malfunction or, user error can be protected in that way. So I think private chains kind of handle a lot of, and so, we've done a lot to kind of secure the node as well as encrypt the messaging from node to node so that only the nodes themselves can actually read the messages that are happening between the nodes.
I think regulation is one important factor which plays a bigger role in adoption. So, and it said that innovation always stays ahead of regulation, right? So regulation always takes a backseat. So what do you think, what's the current stage of regulation and what work needs to be done so that adoption of these technologies can happen faster?
Yeah, I think that's, again, a great question. Where we are in the cycle is, again, we've proven business value. And so what we are doing as a community now is just making blockchain more efficient. And I think part of that commercialization efficiency is not just, the technology, but it's actually the the regulation and the environment, right? I think if you look at even the light bulb, when it was first created, no one had a license to sell light bulbs, and so companies were not buying light bulbs and lighting equipment because they didn't know if they could actually buy that. And so once there was regulation around licensing and giving the authority for folks to sell this, that was when the real commercialization started. And so I think what we see as a technology company, we see a lot of the focus around regulation around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I see India's reopened the cryptocurrency and trading market, but that's really one piece of blockchain, right? Blockchain is really a technology, and I think that as it becomes more well known, there should be some regulation around the technology, and just giving companies and enterprises the comfort that this is fully supported. But I think the other thing with regulation is blockchain is really well suited for government and regulated environments. And so what we've found is our platform, because of the privacy models and the governance frameworks, that some of our best projects are actually working with either government organizations or regulated environments. And so this is just one example of how we are helping prevent tax fraud by tracking transactions on the blockchain, but also being able to code them appropriately in real time for certain tax authorities. And so potentially helping countries collect lost tax revenue is a great way to encourage government organizations to see the value in providing supportive regulation. And then again, another nice value of blockchain is that it can help track, right, and help report in a better way, how companies are complying with certain initiatives. So there's a great example of New York City's Greater Greener Buildings Act, requiring buildings to be carbon neutral as soon as 2025. And so certainly self-reporting is not going to be the answer. When you can include the regulatory bodies on the network with the organizations, they will be able to see this information in real time and actually give them greater visibility. So we are actually trying to lean in with regulators and regulation in general, because we feel that we can lower the cost of complying with regulation, which will make it easier for governmental bodies to enact fair and adequate regulation.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how emerging technologies like blockchain is helping governments across the globe. Would you be able to share more light on some of the smart cities projects where blockchain is being used, or if BlockApps has done any project as far as smart cities is concerned?
Yeah, I would say, when you think about smart cities, the nice thing there is, it's not just leveraging blockchain, right? There's many technologies that are getting shared. And I think one of the biggest is, IoT. So when you think about any kind of smart device and, sharing data, blockchain is receiving its data from these devices. And so we're able to help certainly in areas of certainly energy infrastructure. But when you think about traffic, you think about any kind of security, or just lowering the cost of doing business. There's many ways that we're kind of helping governments and cities with some of their smart city initiatives. I would say that you will find these will move a bit slower because there's more parties involved here. There's more parties, including the other technologies, right? So it's not just a blockchain solution, and then you've got all of the different parties involved in a city, right? The government itself, the infrastructure, the entities, the users. This is one where you really need to build it with the end user in mind. So we're finding that some of the smart city initiatives are very broad and are looking at high value, but will take a little bit of time, to implement.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, still there's a long way to go, but again, the beginning has been done. So is there any way how companies can choose the right blockchain product for the use cases?
Yeah, I think again, going back to our initial conversation, it's making sure the product matches the business value, and so that's probably the first step is don't pick a technology and then try to make that technology create business value. What you want to do is determine your business value first and try to understand what is needed from the technology to achieve those objectives. And so when you think about ideally the best, customers coming to us have already defined their data model and business flow and business logic. And so they can see clearly right away, whiteboarding, and doing demos of our technology, they can see clearly right away whether it does meet those goals or not. And so I think before you entertain, the technology choice, it's really about defining your roadmap. But I think the second thing is, just finding a product that has features built in, and really being clear, about what is being developed and what are you getting out of the box. I think that's where we've seen a lot of choices being made where companies don't want to buy a blockchain that is very limited and basic, and they have to build tools around it just to see their data or manage their data in a similar way. And then the third thing I think, from the question from the audience is, does the blockchain make it easy to integrate, right? Will it communicate with your current system? So I think it starts with, identifying your own value and your own current infrastructure, and then really focusing on, how many features you can get out of the box versus what you may have to pay for being developed.
Yeah. So attaching more importance to out of the box features makes sense because it reduces your effort and time and go to
Exactly.
market time as well.
Exactly, and I think if you're looking at a product, we've seen again a lot of hype, and so I think it's important to kind of cut through a lot of that hype because a screenshot or knowledge about your industry is helpful, but having actually delivered a solution that is somewhat similar is probably going to be more helpful than somebody who just further understands you. And so I think it's really about cutting through the hype and having honest questions and knowing what you want. Even if your company doesn't have a blockchain leadership or blockchain team, you can still know what you want in your product based on what your goals are. And I think it's important to kind of stick to that.
Mhm. So how does BlockApps engage with the startup ecosystem? Do you have a marketplace of sorts where you encourage startup players to build enabling tools or out-of-the-box tools for your platform?
Yeah, we've got a thriving kind of developer community, and we are actually this will be the first place that we mention this, but we are launching an application marketplace, and so startups will be able to again not only take our product out of the box and work around it and build on it, but take fully built applications as well. And so I think enabling startup by giving them the tools that are needed will be very helpful. And so part of that marketplace will be, blockchain development toolkits, right? And so those can have a lot of different looks and feel, from onboarding tools, development tools, translation tools, monitoring, enhanced, APIs, enhancements around key management or database management. And, we basically try to modularize our product in as many ways as possible. So you can plug in your own consensus, you can plug in, your own pieces where needed. And really, as a startup, you can just focus on, meeting the end user value. And I think that's where once we're kind of focused on the end user value, you'll really start to see blockchain take off. And so we'll actually be having more webinars as well, focused around how we can, answer any outstanding questions around the product and just making sure that, our documentation and information is updated and available. And alongside that, we've got a thriving kind of development partner ecosystem that can not only tackle some of these challenges, but help address questions based on their own experience. And so the way we think about the future is the more experience you have in building and developing these applications, it's just going to help the whole community grow.
Mhm. I think it's a great initiative, the application marketplace, right? So can you tell me more about your partner ecosystem? How a startup can be part of BlockApps partner ecosystem or implementation partner? How do
Yeah,
you go about it?
Yeah, so if you're looking to become an implementation partner, I think we spend a lot of time, again, aligning value and just understanding, what is your target market, target approach. And then certainly we spend a lot of time on the educational side and making sure that we're partnering with companies who understand our platform and really understand the benefits, and where we are trying to focus, with our privacy and governance models, that we kind of spend the time on that piece, and then we align the sales effort. So certainly it's easy to reach out to us. You can contact us directly through our website. You can follow our blog, which is the most up-to-date information about what we are doing in the marketplace. So certainly can sign up for those updates, but reach us also through our partner network on the website. And so for the implementation partners, I think we discussed, as we launch the application marketplace, certainly the application partners we are looking for are really the ones that are driving enterprise value. And so the way we've layered the marketplace is in two functions. So if you think about a general corporation, we kind of layered the global applications at the highest level. So these are your accounting, legal, compliance, HR applications, finance, IT. So really solving the needs for generic, just solving the needs for generic corporate customers. And so those we call the global level applications. So if you're solving a generic corporate challenge, we'd like to speak with you. And then the second level is the industry, right? So if you're solving a specific industry challenge within agriculture, energy, healthcare, finance, among others, we really focus on the regulated industries. And if you've got a challenge you're solving there, then we definitely look forward to speaking with you.
Uh, so I have recently come across a news where Microsoft, ENY, and Consensus, they have launched the baseline protocol, Ethereum for enterprises. So this brings to my next question, which is, what is the divide between public and private blockchain, and how the divide is getting breached by, let's say, newer initiatives like, say, the baseline protocol, where they want to replace the settlement layer part of it and move towards more of an middleware layer, especially for integration purposes.
Yeah, I would say, again, the public and private divide, we see, it's potentially kind of, and this is a great step towards kind of bridging that gap going forward. I think, again, when we talk to enterprises and we're building these consortium, we always start with the smallest common denominator. What do you want to share? But if you look at that in the lens of a private and public, lens, what you are thinking about is, what do you want to share with anyone? And what do you want to share with just this network or a defined group? And so I think as you start seeing larger value models that incorporate both the entire community involvement, as well as a segmented area for enterprises to share more private information, you will start seeing more of these public and private hybrid applications. And so that we kind of see the interoperability happening really at the application layer, because the application is what enterprises are buying. And so as long as that application can kind of communicate across all underlying protocols, I think that will kind of serve the need. And so there's been a few of these happening where you've kind of got bridges from multiple networks, from different ecosystems. You've got bridges from public to private. And I think again, going back to one of the questions that one of the participants asked, it's really just about getting stakeholders on the network. And so whichever of these bridges, have the most stakeholders on the network, certainly will drive efficiencies. And again, we're still early on in blockchain efficiency. And so once we've defined, who are the users of that new protocol that's created, they will then push back and say, here's what we need to make this work at a larger scale. So I think you're going to find, those users who want the public-private hybrid, or they hopefully will be more active in their voice in the market and help, educate the developers on what they need to go forward. And so I think there's certainly, room for kind of all of these adoptions going forward.
Mhm. So do you think out-of-the-box tools will play a bigger role in bridging that divide, especially for hybrid models?
We do, but I think again, it's, it goes back to the individual, the use of that, right? It goes back to what is the goal that you're trying to achieve, because I think, interoperability can be very simple or it can be very complex, right? And so if all you're asking for is to share data, API integrations can be helpful. If you're, more concerned about a deeper integration, then it really points back to, what data needs to live where and why. And so I think as long as the folks are consistently focused on the end value of the user and the user has a seat at the table, I think you'll kind of see that, being shaped in the right direction. But I would say, yes, ideally you have products with these tools out of the box. But again, it may be industry specific tools or, global, functionality tools. And so I think interoperability for government organizations is very different than interoperability from social media organizations, in one aspect. And so I think you may see tools that kind of try to solve for different needs.
Mhm. Yeah. Uh, there's one question from Gaurav, and he wants to know how a blockchain solution is different from, let's say, if you're looking from a front-end perspective or IT solution. It looks more like a back-end solution, back-end technology, or more or less like a settlement layer, where the final state of the transaction is being recorded.
Yeah, and that's the great question. And I think that is one of the challenges and why blockchain hasn't been adopted more quickly. With the front end solution, you can kind of point to the screen, you can see it, touch it, and feel it. Blockchain as an infrastructure technology is more of a back end solution. And so I think it does take a little bit more of time to kind of understand the value. But what we've tried to do is, demonstrate the value by showcasing many different front end solutions, right? And so if you've got, even within the accounting space, if you're a corporate accountant, one blockchain network can have many different front end applications. And so by buying one blockchain product, you can get enhanced tax reporting capabilities. You can get an enhanced, invoice management tool. You can get enhancements around AR visibility and, where purchase orders are in the process. So I think that's the objective we try to focus on, is showing that blockchain technology is providing many different types of solutions with multiple types of value. And we found that in our largest customers as well. They're using the same network for many different uses. And so I think that's where we try to, bring those applications to life in multiple settings. But I think, again, it is a tougher conversation, because in an ideal world, you'll never actually see the blockchain. It will just do what is, suggested. But I think, we can use examples such as, the Equifax breach and
Mhm.
other, infrastructure, security vulnerabilities to showcase why, a private and permission segmented, blockchain network can be helpful. And so I think we try to demonstrate that through the current challenges of current infrastructure. And, there's a couple of slides that we like to showcase, but basically, instead of building end-to-endpoint bridges for every network. You can kind of have one shared logical network. And then certainly, the visual of removing intermediaries is quite helpful as well.
Yeah. I think we are drawing to a close. We have less than 6 minutes. So what plans BlockApps has for this year, for 2020? Or is there any specific area or domain where you want to try something new, or an area which is still untouched? Your roadmap of sorts.
Certainly launching the app marketplace is a key objective so that customers can really buy off the shelf the end-to-end solution. We're seeing, blockchain backend companies and, the front-end applications kind of going to market separately, and we're trying to go to the market as a team. So that's one key initiative. We do see governments coming around quickly this year to actually, really adopting blockchain at large scale. So, I talked about a couple of our government initiatives. We'll probably see, many more of those come to fruition. And then the other thing is, we've already built industry consortiums, in travel, in healthcare, in agriculture, and energy. And I think a key focus for us is just growing the ecosystem. Going back to the original question around stakeholders, how do we get more folks to join an existing network? I think certainly we'll continue building networks, but the quicker we can move to a paradigm where folks are just joining networks, I think will be better for all.
Yeah. And I think spreading literacy about the technology itself will help stakeholders come on board and try and implement new solutions.
Yeah. And I would just highlight around interoperability. There is, right? We will be launching our app marketplace with applications who are, available across multiple blockchain technologies. And so again, we see interoperability happening at the app layer, and we're actively involved in that right now. And hopefully once we launch, we'll actually launch with some documentation around how you can create interoperability from a standard framework from, the largest 3 to 5 systems. So we do see interoperability happening today, but I would go back to the business driver. Interoperability can be a checkbox, but if there's no immediate need for interoperability, then there's no point in spending the time and the effort. But if you're finding that one platform can solve 50% and the other solve the other 50%, then you're kind of locked in with both. And so you really need that, to identify why, what is the additional value that the interoperability will bring to you.
Yeah. And I believe business value will be more important than what value interoperability brings to the table.
Yes, again, it goes back to your original point. The business should drive the technology.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think we are close to 1 hour, and I think some people have more questions, so I would request them to send us an email, and we'll be happy to answer that. So thanks, Mark, for your perspective, and it's been a great listening to you. And we have another webinar coming up on 2nd April. Attendees can check on events.rejolut.com, and we'll be seeing you guys soon. Thanks, Mark, for your time.
Yep. Excited about the healthcare webinar in April. Look forward to hearing about that as well.
Sure. See you soon.
Thanks.